early age, there was just a love and a need to express myself through dance and art. And that just kind of continued on through, my grade school and high school. And when I reached college, I decided that I had to make a decision. So even though my love of dance had an edge, I decided to be an art major because my logic was that, you only have a certain amount of time as a dancer physically. And as an artist, I felt, which seems to still be the case, that you can go on and on. There's no retirement date. You can just continue to create as much as you want. I like to use found objects as my material. I like to use common objects for my materials. Plastic, masking tape, rocks, sand, water. I love to see them being transformed into something that's graceful, elegant, transformative, to the point where, you see a poetry in the most simple material. The notion of fragility and tension is very involved, pretty much in everything I do. As human beings, we're fragile, yet we're so sturdy. It's like a baby, just the slightest thing can kill a baby. But then, on the other hand, babies have withstood a lot of stuff and still they survive. So there's this really odd situation about the human spirit, that fragility can also show strength at a certain point. So, and there's a lot of tension just simply existing as a human being. And so I like to incorporate that energy of what it means to exist. My first foray into the art world was in 1969 when I started creating water sculptures. Actually, it's pretty exciting because it was my first time out actually, to be a part of an international exhibit, which took place in Sweden. I've always been about the body, if it's not movement that I'm doing, I like there to be the thought of movement in my sculptures. So with the water sculptures, when I filled these vinyl plastics, forms with water, if you touch them, there's a sense of body. There's a sense of movement. I felt it was very sensual. The human touch, when it touches the sculpture, there's an energy that's exchanged. How do I feel about seeing them after so many years? That excites me because it's always good to see what you've done in retrospect, and also to see if there's any energy left in them, particularly when people see them. Freeway Fets was a performance that I did, actually my first public performance. It was really exciting for me because I was able to do everything really that I wanted to do up until that point, which is do collaborative work, incorporate movement, as well as ceremony and ritual. And I chose to do a piece under the freeway. The reason I chose to do a piece under the freeway was because in this particular part of Los Angeles, there were a number of cultures involved. Native Americans, African Americans, Latinas, Latinos, everybody. It was really, quite a cultural melting pot. So I wanted it for that reason. And also I wanted it to be sort of African-like. At that time, there was still dirt on the floor, large columns, and this is a documentation of that day. The artists that were involved were also musicians, so they were playing drums and saxophone and so on. I was trying to figure out, well, is it jazz or is it African? And actually, it was a blending. And because all of us were very involved with the way Sun Ra went about doing music, it had that kind of energy to it. Nookie Nookie, across 118th Street, originated from my time in Spanish Harlem. I lived in Spanish Harlem the early part of the 70s. And when I was in Spanish Harlem, I just observed that there was this kind of hand-to-mouth kind of existence like a house of cards. So I wanted to have something that had that kind of energy. And this is kind of a performance piece. When I first made it, I was so nervous I could not sleep the night of the opening, before the opening, because I had structured it in such a way that actually someone could come along and it would collapse. And in that case, my thought was, if it collapses, then that person would have to rebuild it. So it has this potential of performance consistently with it. I don't know if I should say thank goodness no one has done that, I'm not sure, but that is the energy that's in that piece. Bulimia. I'm kind of emotional about this because I created this with a friend of mine by the name of Charles Abramson, who was an amazing artist. He passed that year in 1988, and so I went on with it, you know, since he wasn't there, and we had created this kind of mythical place called Bulimia, spelled B-U-L-E-M-I-A, where creativity was the language. And I mean, we just went on and on and on, creating, you know, political figures that were non-political, and I mean, just wonderful ways of dealing with things. And I had these newspapers that were saved by my mom for years, all the way back to before I was born. And so I utilized these newspapers as sort of a humongous collage of events that happen, you know, historical events, because I'm very involved with history. After I finished this piece, they threw it away. And they said, oh, we didn't know, you know, we were supposed to save them. So all this historical material just went into the trash can. So in redoing this one, I had my own surplus of historical papers, and I used those. And I think as I was doing it, I thought, okay, history does repeat itself. So I tried to utilize these papers in a way of telling the story of really how life repeats itself and how you can utilize some of these events to how you have to keep on keeping on.